My very first memory ever was being taken in a car by a social worker from one foster home to a children's home. I just remember like hanging onto a leg and feeling intense trauma and fear and screaming that I didn't want to go there. And the first experience I had was I made up my mind about 3 years old that adults don't really listen to you. And as you're growing and developing, you start to confirm that with your thoughts and your thinking. And I grew up in the care system, at first in probably 2 foster homes. I don't really remember much about it. And then 2 children's homes. Obviously, you hear a lot about young people that are in care. A massive percentage of knife crime at the moment occurs with young people who are looked after. So I just want to share a bit about what it was like for me personally being in care at that time and the experiences that I see young people having now. We lived in a bit of a different time than how we live now. Nobody really told you what was going on. You sort of just got on with things and you were wide-eyed and sort of looking around. I used to remember looking around trying to make sense of the world and not really understand what was happening and what adults were doing and what they were saying to me. But I always remember just a really profound experience of somebody when I was about 6 or 7 saying to me, one of the carers in the foster home saying, well, you know, you just go to work to have a roof over your head and that's kind of it. And I just remember thinking like, well, that doesn't sound like much fun. Don't know if I'll be doing that when I get to be a grown up. And, you know, you hear about everything you probably have heard happens in a children's home. So from sexual abuse, from abandonment, from physical violence, we used to go to school in a big green bus and people used to just take the mickey out of us because, you know, oh, you don't have any parents, ha ha ha. Oh, what have you done? What's happened? And as I got older, I didn't really know. Nobody told me what my story was. So I kind of just made stuff up in my head about it. And when I had my child when I was 23, and I started to begin to think, well, I kind of need to figure out who I am, like as in my story from that. My story was just a kid living in a children's home with 20 other kids suffering a lot of suffering. So I went to find out, and what had happened was my mother had a mental health issue, which meant that she suffered really quite badly, and she had another child who was adopted, and they took that child away from her because we had already been put in care. And it turned out that she had, when we were looking through the notes, you can go to social services and look at your notes, because children in care are the most written about people in the world. Like literally everything about them is written down. So we went to look at our notes, myself and my brother, and we found out, one, we had another sister that we didn't know about, and we also found out that my mum had been a prostitute and my dad had been an alcoholic and had struggled and hadn't been able to keep us together. We also found out that he had another family up in Scotland, so he was obviously married there and had come down south to Brighton. So it's a lot of information, and I find that what's a great thing now in social care system is that they try to do life story work with young people so that they have a sense of who they are. So that's one of the really great things I find that social care and social workers and people who are working with looked after children are doing. So I didn't go, so the messages from the media in the 70s and 80s and 90s were that if you were a child that was in the care system or was coming out of the care system, you would either be addicted to drugs or alcohol, you would probably be homeless, you would probably be pregnant as a teenager, or very likely you would be in prison, or probably you would die early, which is not a great trajectory. And on some level, I kind of thought, well, that's not going to happen to me. I'm not going to let that happen to me. I'm going to just survive, and I'm going to go off, and I'm going to just, you know, that's just not going to be happening. But for me to be in that space, I kind of had to deny everything that happened, and I carried around the trauma. But I thought at 16, they said to us, oh, you can stay in the children's home, but you have to pay, because now the laws changed that young people can stay till they're 18. There's lots of agreements with foster carers to keep young people for longer, till they're 21, but often somebody can be 18 in the care system, and on their 18th birthday, they have to pack their bags and leave and go and live in a semi-independent unit. So that's still something that hasn't, in my eyes, been really resolved very much, because if you think about your own child, when they turned 18, you wouldn't be like, right, get your bag, chop, chip off, unless that's what they wanted to do, but not on their birthday. So at 16, I thought, I'm just going to go off and have a lot of fun. So I lived in squats, I discovered a lot of things, drugs, boys, alcohol, that kind of thing. Went traveling. 19, I went to live in Greece, and it was kind of like I was carrying it, but it was in denial. I was like pushed it down, but it would surface. It began to surface in other ways. I started, once I'd had my own child, I looked at my child and I started to think and process, oh God, how could you give away your child? How could you not see your children? Like, how is that even possible? And started to develop panic attacks. So I would go out of the house and I would just be like, the road would seem huge, like the road would seem like a mile long, and it wasn't a mile long, it was tiny. And then I began to get quite depressed. I found it difficult to go out. Like as my son got older, I would take him to school, and then I would just get back into bed, put the covers over my head, and be like, oh. And it was like it was all stuck in my body, and my thoughts kept playing, and suppressed memories started coming through, which I understand now from coming to the 3 principles, understanding that suppressed memory is still just thoughts, but they're thoughts that come up from somewhere. I'm not an expert on the psychology of the brain or neuroscience, but my understanding comes from they're thoughts that you've had and they come back in, and they only have an impact on you if you you may get triggered by something, but in the moment you understand that it's not real, whereas before I thought it was all real. I thought everything was real, that how I felt was real, that the trauma in my body was real, that my circumstances were always going to be real for me. That was going to be something that I was never going to overcome. So I started on a massive journey of healing. I thought, right, well, I went for homeopathy. It came really from not wanting to pass some stuff on to my own child. So I started counselling. I went for counselling, psychotherapy, humanistic counselling, experiential counselling. I just did the whole lot. And what I used to find was that I would go to the counsellor and talk about the stuff, and then for the couple of days afterwards, I would feel absolutely awful. And I was reflecting on it yesterday, actually, and I was thinking about, why was that? And what I understand now, Ian Watson would say during some of the training, was that you're being taken back to a memory that is causing you upset and emotional upset. So in a way, and I love psychotherapy, like body psychotherapy. I think there's places for things if you want to go and explore. I don't think that's wrong at all. But I think what's a great thing to do is to understand that when you're bringing up those memories into your fresh thinking, you're going to have an impact on your feelings, because the thought-feeling connection is going to bring up the feeling. And that was what was happening a lot. And I was like, and I was doing so much work. Why don't I ever feel better? And I kind of carried around my story in me. And I was quite, not intolerant, because I've got a lot of empathy, but because I'd survived so much, like I'd been sexually abused when I was really young. I didn't really understand that. The mental abuse was sometimes people saying nasty things to you in the children's home, but it was often more about not talking about emotions, never talking about anything. Nobody ever said anything. So you just were left in a space of making all the stuff up for yourself. So I originally came into this understanding from a different way, maybe from some people, that I did a course with a guy called Richard Wilkins, and he talks a lot about the negative chat and the script, and I found that to be, that was sort of almost life-changing for me. And my son, he won't mind me saying, because we've talked about it, he was suffering with some depression, and I was searching for answers for him, really. But while I was searching for answers for him and trying to fix him and fix myself, because I thought, I need fixing, there's something wrong with me. And everywhere I was going, the media, psychotherapists, counselling, that not intentionally, of course not, but they were telling me I need fixing. And the psychological movement and the spiritual movement often tells people there's something wrong with you. You need to be fixed. If you've got anxiety, there's something wrong with that. If you've got depression, there's something wrong with that. And what starts to happen when you come into the three principles understanding, and I came through Richard Wilkins and understanding around the negative chat and the script, and I thought, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I was always like, well, I'm a really positive person because I read all these positive books, I do all this work, but actually inside my head was all this chat going on. And for a good year or so, I was really invested in understanding what the script was, understanding my negative thinking. And then I started to get moved towards, I knew Elizabeth, I didn't know Ian, I knew Elizabeth Luvius, and she'd been working in this way. And a friend of mine, Becky, had said to me, oh, there feels to be like some similarities between what Elizabeth is talking about and what you're talking about. So I went along to one of Elizabeth's, I think it was a Wellbeing at Work day. She invited me to come, and I just heard so much in that, just so much around, hold on a minute, we're not broken. We've just had these circumstances that we've had to overcome. But actually, we're innately wise, all of us. Like if we look back and think about things we thought about as a child, we've got our wisdom, but we're just taught along the way. Somehow, some way, we're taught that our wisdom is, we're taught not to listen to it. It's sort of taught out of us in a way, which is kind of like, and it's like, oh, and we forget that we've got this wisdom already. And I love now the thought understanding of not attaching to any thoughts, just like my deepening of my own understanding and wisdom and training to be a three principles practitioner over the last year. The most difficult thing and Ian and Elizabeth will agree with you with this, is I still carried that. I thought, well, I understand what you're saying, yeah, and I feel wise and I feel, but can it really fall away? Can my identity of being a kid from the care system who survived, can I really allow that to fall away? And what started to happen was slowly, I was like, oh, okay, it's all made up. Yes, never ever, when you work with young people, never ever discount what they're going through. Like I always say to young people that if you're being hurt or something's happening to you that is inflicted on you by an adult, that is real, and we need to keep you safe. So we need to take you, and that might be difficult. We might need to take you out of the situation you're in and put you somewhere else. It's not your fault. It's not anything you're doing, but physically and mentally, I have to keep you safe. Also, what I can say to you when you're triggered in the classroom, which we did some brilliant training with 21 young people in a school in Merton, a Harris Academy school. What I can say to you when you have a thought storm is that, hold on a minute, that's just a thought coming up. That's just a memory. You're safe here. This isn't happening to you. You're safe. And that's an amazing place to be, and to send the message to young people, ourselves as well, because even as adults, some of us still feel we're broken, that we're always going to have anxiety, we're always going to be depressed. And it's just a state of being. And I think what I love now is I just completely love the fact that, oh, I'm in contrast. Because if I want joy and peace and happiness, I'm going to sometimes have the other things. Of course I am. I'm going to be anxious. I came back from Morocco on Thursday night And immediately I got on the train at Gatwick, and I felt my mood. It started to go. And so before coming to this understanding, that mood would have probably took me for a couple of days. I probably would have been like, oh, I hate my life. I don't want to be here. This is shit, blah, 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 blah. And I just chose and really noticed. I noticed, and I was like, oh, okay, I'm noticing what's happening here. This is just thoughts. They're all temporary. I can attach to them, and I can attach to the feeling that it's bringing me, or I can allow it to just pass away. Actually, take a good look at yourself. You've got an amazing life. You've just been away to Morocco. You've got a lovely place to live. You've got lots of friends. You feel really well. So, and it's almost like the grounding and the understanding your psychological system, because it's so important to understand how your thoughts are working, because we're not taught it. We're taught about the weather system. We're taught about the solar system. I learned this from iHeart Training. You're taught about all these other systems, but you taught about how your psychological system works, how your thoughts and feelings work. You know, I believe strongly that the two of the major things that to be taught to young people in school now are how your psychological system works, how your thoughts work, the fact that there's no bad or good emotions. They're just emotions, because there's a lot of attachment, particularly around social media, around young people. There's a lot of attachment to, oh, I don't feel good today, so there must be something wrong with me. I don't want to eat that, there must be something wrong with me. I feel depressed, there's something wrong with me. And the highest killer of young people is not drugs, it's not alcohol, it's suicide. And suicidal thoughts are coming from, you're having a thought that's very temporary, but you don't know it's temporary, and you think it's going to stay with you forever, and you attach to it and you take an action. And this is what I say to young people around knife crime. It's like they're frightened. They're frightened young people. They're out there, they're thinking, I've got to carry a knife, I don't feel safe. And if we can just teach them that actually it's in that action, it's a thought that's temporary. If you don't take the action, don't take the action. And we're meeting up with, I think you had Dan on here, like next weekend we're going to be doing a workshop around having an intergenerational conversation, because young people are wise, older people are wise, and what can we share together and what can we hear, because they live in a very different time to us. We didn't have social media so much. I mean, I used to teach IT in school, but we didn't have that stuff. We had freedom. We had a lot of freedom. Like, we went out. Nowadays, everything is kind of controlled and compressed in. And I find that's one of the major things. Like, if there's anybody who listens to this later or listens on the call, that if you're working with young people, this is what they say to me all the time. They say, we just want you to actually listen to what we're saying, not try to fix us, not tell us what to do, not tell us what we need, just listen. So, like, if I give you an example of my work. So I work as an advisory education consultant for looked after children. And in this work, we are looking at raising educational attainment for looked after children, because when they move placement, they might move school, they're disruptive at school. There's a lot of work in schools around trauma and attachment, which is fantastic work. I've got a friend, Lisa Cherry, who's doing amazing work in that area, and teaching young people and teachers about, oh, if you attach to one person or you have a safe space with one person and you understand what the trigger is, you are able to, there's a lot of healing in that. And schools to understand that, you know, all behaviour that you consider to be bad behaviour is because of an unmet need. No young person wants to throw a chair or swear at you, but there's so much control in schools. There's not a sense of freedom of thinking. It's like, well, you will wear this set of clothes and you will answer me like this because I'm the adult. Well, actually that isn't how it works. It works by having a conversation. Like young people that I mentor, maybe I don't even talk a lot. Like one of my mentors, they said to her, oh, why is it that you like Chrissy? She said, well, she doesn't really ask me any questions. Because, you know, there's nothing worse than, I think as parents, we do it. Like, you had a good day at school, what did you do? Blah, blah, blah. Whereas actually, if we just share and deeply listen to what young people are saying, and deeply listen to the people that are helping young people. So like, I think I said, like I was going to say about a scenario. So like, for example, I might be working with a young person who's at risk of exclusion from school, and the school just won't know what to do with that. They won't understand. They won't realise that through no fault of their own, because they're under such huge amounts of pressure, budget cuts, and it's just around that sometimes we have to come to a place of, let's all just sit and be in the moment. And what happens a lot with young people is, what's brought up time and time again is, well, you did this last week, you did this last year, you behave like this, you behave like that. So I found that coming into this understanding now, I just really, really work in the moment. Like literally, like, right, okay, what can we do now? What's the solution now? And when you come in from a space of grounding yourself, which is the most important thing for all of us, if we're going to come into 3 principles understanding, is to understand ourselves, understand our own triggers, understand how our own psychological system is working for us, because we have to know ourselves before really we can support other people and other young people. And I find that they will hear it. I'm not saying that they'll never do those behaviours again. Of course, we all go back to doing something, but we've just got the experience of hearing it and understanding it at such a young age. So when we were doing our training for young entrepreneurs at Harris Academy, this one young lady asked us this amazing question, because we did like a coaching session to intake them, so they kind of knew who we were, and we chatted about what we were going to do and what it meant to be an entrepreneur. But really, we were teaching them about their thought understanding, because your thoughts will hold you back in an entrepreneurial situation if you don't understand them. And she said to one of the facilitators, John, she said to him, well, what makes you think you can teach us about life? Qualified, I think she said, or teach us about life. And it was a really fascinating question that we all answered. And I said, from my point of view, I said, look, I've waited for 45 years to find this understanding and come to a place of peace. And all I'm doing is hoping that I can show you that you're not broken, you're very wise, that what you say matters, that even if bad things have happened to you or are happening to you, it's not who you really are. And in that space, I don't want you to wait. I do not want you to wait for 45 years to figure it out. And we can feel a bit, I don't know if anyone else has had this who's come to the understanding. I sometimes get a bit cross. I'm like, why did nobody ever tell me that before? Like, how much thousands of pounds have I wasted on therapy, for goodness sake? And honest to God, like, I'm really, really cross. Why did I not know that? But I kind of did know that. But the systems and the beliefs and the society I was brought up in, we'd forgotten. So I absolutely love what you're doing now, because I think it's a brilliant movement. I think we've got an opportunity here to touch young people's lives. And I really want to say, for all the people that are out there helping young people, it's like, please, please, please make sure you're looking after yourself, because I see it all the time. There's like, I went to I'm working a contract at Wandsworth Council, and we had a breakfast meeting. So there's social workers, psychologists, teachers, and we're all of us are expected to take care of young people. Of course we are. It's paramount. It's really important. But I think a lot of what's happened is forgotten to look after yourself. And what this really forgotten to look after yourself, really, like, how can you look after other people if you don't look after yourself and you don't understand what's happening for you and where your thoughts are and where your feelings are taking you in that moment. Because, you know, it's like I say, I don't know who counted, but someone said to me, you have 70,000 thoughts a day. So which ones do we pick to act on? Which ones are real? Which ones do we listen to? And I see, and I know for myself, I've done it myself. It's like we so busy looking after other people and trying to fix things that we're not taking care of ourselves. And I even though I'm doing the same contract, the same job, I'm not doing that anymore, because I'm just coming from a very, very grounded place of, actually, if we just take some time out to understand what's going on for us, not reenact what's happening out there. Because, you know, there's a saying, which I love, is hurt people because they've been hurt. So we can look and we can say that's the perpetrator, this is the one that's done that, but let's look behind that. Let's teach those people, when we've been hurt, actually, let's look at that. Let's look at what we've created, what we're able to unlearn from that situation now. And I think it's really important. I don't actually even just think it's important to have young people having the conversation. I think it's important that we have all the conversation together. And that's where I came up with the idea for the intergenerational conversation, because there's a lot of work around regeneration of communities. So originally I was thinking of regeneration of communities, because we regenerate a community by building new buildings, we put things in it. But actually, how about we look and think, oh, a regeneration of a community is an intergenerational conversation between us all. Okay, like what would you like? What do you need? What would you like for your future? And have those conversations with young people and have a look at what they're finding as their struggles for their mental health, which is what Resilient Young Minds are asking that question around. You know, what is it around mental health that you need support with? And I think if we can teach them that no emotion is good or bad, that's a really amazing place to start with. So it almost takes a lot of power out of where you are. Like, so I'll just be like, oh, I'm like really anxious today. Okay, yeah, I'm connecting with my heart. I'm like, oh, why am I anxious? Oh yeah, because I've got this to do. I've got an exam, or oh, somebody shouted at me, or I don't feel like I've got the right clothes on today, or my hair's gone wrong, or I've forgotten to do. And just notice and really connect in with your thought, feeling, connection. Because when you talk to a lot of young people, they're like, oh, and I love the fact, because they just get it so quickly. They're like, oh, okay, yeah, all right then. Like, I went into school to follow up on some mentoring, and one of the young girls was like, in isolation, but we won't talk about isolation because that's a pet peeve of mine, because I just think isolation, like, okay, so I'm already feeling bad, I'm already having these thoughts going on in my head, and you're going to stick me in a room on my own to think a little bit more? Hello. So that's another conversation, I think. But I said, what are you doing in here? She said, oh, this girl really got my nerves. She pushed my bag, so I just give her a good punch, give her a dig. And I was like, well, okay. I said, I hear you. I said, I often want to give people a good punch. I said, sometimes I want to poke their eyes out with pencils. She was like, huh? I said, yes. I said, but I know it's just a thought. It's temporary. It will pass. And I don't get into trouble because I've not took any action based upon what I was thinking about. She went, oh. And you could see her mind just like going, oh, okay. Yeah, like adults think odd things. You know, I said, don't get me started on commuting. When someone's pushing you, you definitely want to punch them. And I think just sharing what they say is, young people to me, particularly when they're in difficult circumstances, like they've just been taken out of their home, they're living in children's homes, they've been moved around a lot. They want to have a connection with you. They don't want you to show up, ask them, excuse my language a bit, but shitloads of questions that they've been asked 100 times before. They want you to just show up and say, hi, I'm here. I'm just trying to help you. these are the, you know, what do I really need to know all of the ins and outs of that? Like, we're very interested in stories. Like, I shared some of my story at the beginning because we connect. So if we sit down with people, it doesn't matter, you don't have had to have difficult beginnings, because all of us, like, that's my story, but it's not any more poignant or different or difficult than someone else's. It's my story. But your story is just as important, and there'll be something you can share in your story as an adult to a young person that they will be like, oh, okay. Because ultimately, our bodies, our vehicles that we're carrying around are all different, our stories are all different, but our psychological thought system is universal for all of us. And our feelings are universal for all of us. So connecting with young people on that thought feeling level cuts out everything out. It doesn't matter if I'm a white middle-aged person and you're a young black boy who's in trouble, and it doesn't matter, because I'm going to sit down with you and I'm going to just show you who I am from a point of my thoughts and feelings, and I'm going to look at you and for you in a space of love and light. And that's the only place you can come to. And when they feel that from us, they feel it. And there's a feeling, you can't even really explain it. And you can just go into a room and it can be different. So coming to the understanding, the biggest thing was letting my own identity around being in care fall away. It's still part of me, but I'm able to fall away as a traumatic experience, because I can look at it as a gift, which might sound, for some, it sounds, you know, I've heard other people say it's a gift. It's an amazing gift, because also now, like, it sounds like a flip side of it. I don't have any parents to take care of, because all of my friends of my age have got parents with dementia. They're having to look after them. It's a very stressful. So now I've got so much freedom, and I've got space here to kind of negotiate and work through and spread a message with lots of other people in the community, and do that as a piece of work. Like, it's not even work, like work, I'm saying work as in the word work, but it's not, because it's a joy. It's joyful. It's such a joyful place to be, and to show people that actually you can have a bit of a difficult time, but actually you don't need to take that. You can use it as a resilient space to come from, and a place to support and help other people, but it doesn't need to define who you are forever, you know. And obviously I'm making light of it. It was a bit of a joke. It was easy. It just took nearly 50 years. And we were just kind of laughing about that, saying, yeah, it was really easy. It only took 50 years. And just kind of making a joke and just kind of showing, because when you're in it, when you're in a difficult circumstance, you lack control. And what we find with young people is this understanding gives them a sense of control, as in, like, because they can sense that, oh, hold on a minute, this is happening to me on the outside, but I can be in charge of how I respond to that. So that's actually a massively empowering place to be in. So even though the outside of your life could still not be going how you want it to be, you can feel that you have got, the control's a funny word, but, you know, because you know, we don't control our thoughts, because where do they come from, and they come in. But there's a sense of, hold on a minute, thought, feeling, reaction. I can be empowered in that. I can really be empowered in how I feel around that. So I would say my main takeaways really for working with young people would be, just meet them where they're at. Just really just sit down, just listen. Don't, like, particularly if you're working with young people that are having really sets of difficult circumstances, don't ask lots of questions. Show up, share something of yourself, really share something of yourself. There's all this stuff around, oh, professional boundaries, and you mustn't do this and you mustn't do that. That's actual bullcrap. Sorry, that is. I'm not listening to that, and I'm not, it's like, obviously you're not going to disclose things that can upset them and cause them trauma, but you share something of yourself to make that connection. And I would say, you know, that there is another way that is really possible, and that is coming from this understanding. Yes, try other things if they work for you. Try healing, body healing, because your body, you hold trauma in your body. Really, I do feel, but from a thought understanding, this for me, and I see it for many, many people, is really the answer, because you're not being taken back continually to the traumatic situation and asked, well, how did you feel when you were 3 years old, and what did your mother say, and da, 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 da. I don't see the point in that now. If you look at my t-shirt, I don't know if you could see it which way round it is, all we have is now. And that's been for me, like, and when I get caught in my thinking of like, well, you know, it's much more difficult for me because I didn't have any parents. I just know, oh, well, you know, all I've got is now, so let's just live in the moment. Let's just really ground ourselves and be in the moment. And it kind of takes a lot of pressure off of life, I find.
Chrissy, you've spoken about it. You've sort of said it in different ways, but a lot of the people watching this, I hope, are actually going to be young people who don't know what this understanding is.
Okay.
Right? So you've mentioned this understanding, and you've mentioned coming into the three principles understanding, and you mentioned Richard, and you mentioned Elizabeth and Ian, but they won't know who any of those people are or what that is. So the people obviously from, you know, who do know about the three principles understand who all those people are and what it's about. But for the young people themselves, and you have given some examples of what it's about, but maybe you could share a little bit about what you actually share with young people, so that the young people watching will know what the understanding is that's helped you. Yeah,
okay, I see. So well, we would approach it as in, so personally how I would approach it, I would talk about, so if you as a young person, I would talk about looking at and getting you to think, to have some time to think about, right, how do my thoughts work? And we would share questions. So we talk about, okay, this isn't an intellectual learning. Do we understand what we mean by intellectual? Intellectual is when books, reading, having to learn things. This is more about a feeling that you may get and you may have. And we'll talk about when you might have an insight, when you might understand something for yourself. So we'll begin by speaking about how your thoughts are working and looking at the system of how your thoughts work, and talking about, okay, let's understand what a thought is. How many thoughts do you have a day? Like we talked earlier about, right? How many thoughts do you think you have a day? I don't know. And then we'd have a little conversation about that. And then could you take your thoughts from your mind, put them on the table, and take a picture of them? They love that. Oh no, I can't take a picture of them. Okay, one I love. I look at the time. I'm like, hold on a minute. What's the time? It's 11:45. All right. And can you tell me what you're thinking about yesterday at 11:45? Do you remember, Anne, what you were thinking about? And some of them will say back to me, oh well, I was doing this. Or one guy in a conversation said, well, I was at a funeral, and I was like, oh, I'm really sorry, you know, but can you actually tell me? He said, I was probably thinking about how sad I felt. And I said, okay, I hear that. I said, and that's a specific event that you're putting a thought feeling to, which brings it back for you. But a lot of the time, we don't know. I can't tell you what I was thinking about at 11:45 yesterday. And then that leads us into a conversation about, there you can see that your thoughts are temporary. Your thoughts are temporary, because if you don't remember them, they've gone away. And then we start to talk about, okay, so tell me when you have a thought where you feel like you're in the zone. And like, by the zone, what do we mean when we say the zone? Well, when you feel good. So we talk about, okay, right, what do those thoughts come, what thoughts are they? What are you doing? And people say, well, I'm in the bath, I'm playing sport, I might be listening to my favorite music, I might be dancing. And you start to get that feeling of like, oh, okay, yeah, and what's going on then? What's actually going on when you're in the zone? Well, a lot of people say, well, I'm not thinking because I'm concentrating on something, and there is thinking going on, but what you're allowing yourself to do is be in a different space where you're present. You're very present in the moment. So if you're playing sport, you're present in that moment. You're not thinking about, oh, I don't like Christine because she pulled a funny face at me in maths. You're like thinking about, right, I'm in the zone, I'm having a great time. Some people love to be in the bath. That's somewhere where they really enjoy. Just start to get young people to start to notice what they're thinking about, and then start looking at, okay, then we'll look at, tell us what things don't make you feel so good, what thoughts are going on where you're not feeling great. So they'll say things like, well, when a teacher tells me off, or when someone said something nasty on social media about me, or when my mum drinks, or when my brother is mean to me, or when so they start to get a connection about the things, and then we'll just talk about, and that's the experience. But when you're sitting in maths and you start to think about that thought again, what would happen to you? And then they start to discuss thought. We get them to start thinking about thought, feeling, connection, and the importance of, when we're in the zone, what can happen when we feel in a good place, how different that is to when we're not feeling in a good place, and what kind of things will happen. So it's like a discovery and a place where we'll talk about understanding how your psychological system is working, thought, feelings, actions you might take when you don't feel good. Like some of them will talk about, there's a lot of self-harming with young girls and some boys, but young girls, and they'll talk about how they've taken the action based upon a thought, or they're suppressing it and they're not feeling it, and how that action gives them the feeling, and talking about how we can get a feeling from just what we're thinking about, and discovering it's really kind of, you kind of move and just see what comes up in the room. Like there's another example of using, which I use a lot, who are someone who do a lot of training in schools, with plasticine, Play-Doh, and you get the young person to make something out of something and put it down, and we sort of have a conversation about that, and then we make something else, and then we talk about, if we thought that was thought, how is it thought can change in that moment. So here's our Play-Doh, but we squished it, and it's not the same, it's something different, but it's still a thought. And we're just introducing at whatever level they're coming in at, and they get it really, really quickly. And so what we'll do is, when we're showing them the thought, feeling, connection, is we'll have a look also at around what sort of things happen when we're in the zone. So when we feel good, how does that come out in our actions? So in that space of feeling good, what are we more likely to achieve? So, and that's a great conversation to have, because then we start to look at really positive things, like, oh, well, anything's possible for me. Like, I can not feel frightened. I can be creative. I can paint a picture. I can, and just to start getting them to see what's possible when we focus in, and we allow the other thoughts to pass that are not making us feel good. And I'm just thinking, like, that would be in a group situation, and it's really interesting at how quickly they pick it up, and they start to say that back in, we had a situation where everybody was a bit unsettled one day, and one of the young men was like, well, that's just your thinking. It's just the thinking in the moment. So they kind of, it starts to become a language that you start to hear them them talk about. So they start to really listen in themselves to what's happening for them. And I think I don't approach it in a very set way. I'll have a loose idea. If I was working with somebody who was looked after and they're having a particularly difficult time, I would just approach it from I would explain about how thoughts work, as in they're temporary, that I would set up a very safe space for somebody. So if I was working with a young person who had just come into care, there's a lot going on. There's so much thinking, so much thinking happening in that situation, thinking about they've done something wrong. And I would just sit in that space with them and just gently talk to them about, you're not broken. You're not broken. This is a set of external circumstances that are happening to you. But what I can do is I can support you in the situation of how you can respond to it and how you can be supported with your thinking and feeling to feel okay, even though you're in a very difficult situation. And you can start to see, okay, sometimes they'll hear, sometimes they won't, but it's just about, so when I'm doing a one-to-one session, I'm very much be just gently, do the few examples that I've talked to you about, and then they can start to slowly see, oh yeah, well maybe it's when I took that action yesterday that caused me to be here today. And what starts to happen is, for young people, is they can take their own kind of, not ownership of bad things that are happening to them, but ownership of how they're reacting to it. That it's very possible to react in a positive way to a negative situation, and there's always a different outcome, and there's always a solution. And I think we've talked about, personally, I don't get into explaining what 3 principles are with young people. I would never do that. I'll just come from a place of, look, you're not broken. You don't need fixing. You've got wisdom. And I love saying that to young people. You've got wisdom. Tell me a time when you think about a time that you feel that you've had wisdom and you haven't been able to talk about that. And then I might give a couple of examples of things that have worked for me around my own wisdom, and just explain what wisdom is. What is wisdom? What do we think wisdom is? What is insight? What is an insight? And like an insight for me personally would be something that I like, oh, okay. Like some people would say a light bulb moment, or it might be a feeling I've got inside me that, oh, actually, I don't think I'll go there today. And just to start for them to, because that's a really good way for young people to keep themselves safe, is to listen into that. They're in a tricky situation. If you think about a situation that might escalate into knife crime, listen in to what, don't go there today. Something inside of you is saying to you, your wisdom is saying, oh, maybe we won't do that today, or maybe I will tell the teacher, or maybe I will tell my parent or my carer that my friend's carrying a knife because they're scared. Maybe I will say, and that'll be okay. My wisdom will tell me that's okay. And, on the front line, these are the conversations we're having to have, because it's no joke. Like, I'm not trying to paint a horrible picture for young people to be frightened and scared. No, don't be frightened and scared. Be in touch with your wisdom and just listen. And I've had a young person that actually did go and report that their friend was carrying a knife, and he did go and it could have averted a death. So I don't think we'll ever underestimate just. So those are the kind of questions I would say I would make. I'd get them to just start to get the thought, feeling connection, starting to understand that no emotion is wrong. There's not bad or good emotions. That ultimately you're not broken. You're never broken. You can't be broken. There might be a difficult circumstance that you're in, and it can feel insurmountable sometimes. Imagine if you've just been took away from your parents, or that can, and it gives a sense it's lovely to leave a sense of hope somewhere in that, because I just feel that without hope and joy and possibility, that's when the other emotions can really take over for us. Is that helpful?
That's really helpful. Thanks, Chrissy. Yeah, that's one thing that might be worth just speaking a little bit more about, that people might be wondering, and that might demonstrate a little bit more about the understanding, is you had that background of going through all of that, and now you're not suffering as a result of that. So how would you say that that's changed? How is it that you're not suffering now?
How am I not suffering now? That's a great question, because I would say that what happens is, because I now understand that it was my thoughts and my thinking and my repeating of those scenarios that had happened to me when I was young, and those constant going back to them, that was the suffering I was as an adult, not as a young person. Or yes, of course those things happen, but as an adult I recreated that suffering. So I'm not suffering now, because what happens is, when I notice those memories coming back, because they're thoughts and they pop in sometimes, and I notice and I'm aware, so I'm able to not always, because there's always going to be contrast in life, I'm always going to have suffering. What about if something happens to one of my family members or people I love, or something awful's happening in the world? I'm going to feel suffering. But what's happening much more so is that I'm much more able to bring myself back to a place of peace, because I know in my core that I'm not broken. I've got innate wisdom. I'm a wise person, and that while that thing that external circumstance could be happening, internally, even if I go back into my head chat and my thoughts and my thinking, and don't get me wrong, it will come back, and there'll be times when I don't feel okay, of course. But what happens is, I know that it's okay not to feel okay. And I don't need to do a damn thing about it. I can just sit in it. Some days I call them, I like have a little pity party. That's cool. And I'm never saying to somebody, oh, you're always going to feel great and you're never going to feel all bad again. You're not going to. But when I'm talking about the deep, deep suffering of bringing up all of those painful external things that happen to me, no, I don't need to do that, because what's happening, I really understand that our thoughts are creating our reaction to the experience. I'm not saying I could go out, walk down the road, someone could pull a knife or a gun on me. Did I cause that to happen? Did I cause that experience? Was that something I put out into the universe? You know, some people have this idea that, oh, you create your thought, you create your experience by your thinking, blah, blah, blah. No, that experience happened to me outside of me. But what I can take care of and understand is that my reaction to the experience in the moment, or later on from the moment, if I'm triggered, I've got post-traumatic stress disorder, I'm able to understand that, oh, hold on. Oh, like I said about when I got home from Morocco, the feeling of starting to feel down, that was what it was about. It was like, oh, okay, I'm noticing my thought feelings. That's where I can support myself in my own suffering. Yeah. But also just to kind of be like, let yourself off the hook a bit when you don't feel great, because that is just simply it. That's the contrast of life, because I can't have joy if I've never had despair, because how will I know what it feels like? But what I can do is be more often in peace and love and joy, rather than be in the suffering and the despair. And so I think I think that's it really, and I think that's what is the great thing you can take away from understanding how your thoughts and your psychological system are working, is that, okay, yes, I will still have times when I don't feel great, and I've had a breakup of a relationship, or something's happened, you know, at work or in my own personal life. But what I'll notice is that I'm much more resilient. I'm much more able to be, oh, okay. And I'm much more present in the moment. I'm so much more. And I think that's one of the things. If you're present in the moment and you're not in your past and you're not worrying about your future and you just keep yourself in the moment, there's not really that much space for too much suffering.
No, that's right. And also, like you said before, if you're not judging feelings as right or wrong or good or bad, they're just feelings. That's just part of the experience that we're having in this moment. Then you don't have to suffer, do you? Because it's only us telling ourselves that I shouldn't be feeling this, or I shouldn't be feeling that, or this is wrong, or that's wrong. If we're not judging what we're experiencing, if it's just an experience, what's to suffer?
Yeah, that's true. And I think, you know, coming to the fact that I think there's a, you know, on my journey, I did go through a place of like, oh, well, you know, how am I creating my experiences? Like, I just don't understand, because I wouldn't create that for myself. So how is that? And then you start to be like, oh, well, actually, I think it might have been Jackie Moses, who works a lot with young people, and she works in prison. She, you know, we were having a conversation one day, and it's great just to keep in conversations with people. This is how we help young people, is by having conversations like this with them, like deep conversations that mean something. And that's what she kind of got. I just had an insight when I was chatting to her. That's what she was saying. She said, well, like, you know, we think that, you know, you're not necessarily saying you're creating your experiences, because you're not responsible for what other people are doing. You're just creating your own reaction to a human experience. And like I said earlier, like, some people say to me, oh God, you know, you had such awful, terrible, and it's not as bad as mine. And I'm like, listen, it's not about that. It's not about comparing. It's about, that was my difficult human experience that I now can share and help and support. And, you know, there's I think in 2017, there were 72,000 looked after children. And I think maybe this year there's 82,000. So it's going up. There's something wrong with that. So this understanding is definitely a solution for this, because it's in direct relation. Listen to this for a statistic. There's 82,000 looked after children. What's the prison population? 82,000. So isn't that like interesting? And a lot of people that end up in prison have been in the care system. So for me, I feel like, and I'm working, you know, with Resilient Young Minds and the Wisdom and Wellbeing Collective, and the work that you're doing, Anne, here with getting this message out to young people, is that it's not just about for looked after children, it's for all young people. It's really an understanding for everybody. But obviously, because of my own background, my passion and the where I want to take it is into that niche and into that group of people, to just kind of be like, so this is a solution that we can provide for not just suffering for looked after young people, but for all people. Because like you said, it becomes about, it's not suffering, it's a human experience that I'm able to understand. Like, I'm more than happy to do free coaching, free listening. I've got a little idea in my head, because I live in a very busy area where there's a couple of nightclubs. Susan doesn't know it yet, she's on the call, but I thought we could just go one night into the queue and just ask young people, like, hey, one question about what we could support your mental health. Like, we sort of say a lot, oh, we want to help young people, but I think it's not about whether we're young or whether we're old. It's just about being brave enough to share the understanding. If somebody asks me and they say, oh, you seem different, you know, and I just gently share. And I think that's what we can do.
Thank you very much, Chrissy.
You're very welcome. It's been fun. It's lovely to talk to you, Anne.
Lovely hearing your story and lovely hearing about what you're doing.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks, and bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.